He asked me for a divorce 10 minutes before I could tell him we were having a baby. I had spent the entire afternoon rehearsing the words, imagining every possible expression on Grant's face except the one I actually saw when he came home that evening. He looked calm. Too calm. His charcoal coat was still buttoned when he entered our Chicago townhouse, and instead of kissing my forehead the way he usually did, he placed a large white envelope on the kitchen table between us. "Ethan, we need to talk." My fingers closed around the pregnancy test hidden inside my sweater pocket. That morning, 2 pink lines had appeared so quickly that I had checked the instructions 3 times. After 4 years of marriage, I thought I was carrying the one piece of news powerful enough to bring us back to the same side of the table. Then Grant pushed the envelope toward me. I filed for divorce. For several seconds, I could only hear the refrigerator humming behind me. "You already filed?" The attorney prepared everything. "Nothing has to become hostile. I want this handled fairly." Fairly. He sounded like he was discussing a contract. I stared at the papers without touching them. "Is there someone else?" Grant's jaw tightened. That hesitation answered before he did. "Miles and I have gotten close." Miles Carter. The beta from Grant's office who knew his coffee order, traveled with him to development meetings, and somehow appeared in stories about work more often than anyone else. "How close?" I asked. "Nothing happened while we were together." Grant looked directly at me. "But I have feelings for him, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest." I almost laughed at the word dishonest. For months, I had eaten dinner alone while Grant worked late. I had stopped asking whether he would be home for Sunday breakfast because disappointment tasted worse with coffee. Still, some stubborn part of me had believed exhaustion was the enemy, not another person. My hand remained inside my pocket. The plastic test felt impossibly small against my palm. "If there were something left between us worth saving, would you stay?" Grant's expression softened, which somehow hurt more than anger would have. "Ethan, dragging this out will only hurt both of us." That was my answer. I slowly removed my hand from my pocket, leaving the test hidden. "All right." His eyebrows lifted. "That is all you are going to say? What would change if I said more?" Grant looked toward the divorce papers. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know." And I did know. Grant had not come home planning to destroy me. He had simply made a future in his head where I was no longer his husband, then arrived expecting me to sign my name beneath it. I picked up the envelope and walked upstairs. "Ethan." I stopped without turning around. "I had something to tell you tonight," I said. "What?" My throat tightened, but my voice stayed steady. "It does not matter anymore." Behind the bedroom door, I finally pulled out the pregnancy test. Tomorrow I would call my doctor. Soon I would have attorneys, appointments, decisions, and a life I had never expected to build without Grant. I pressed one hand against my stomach, although there was nothing to feel yet. "You will never be the reason someone stays where they do not want to be," I whispered. Downstairs, the divorce papers waited for my signature. In my hand was proof that Grant had unknowingly walked away from 2 people instead of 1. The worst part was that our marriage had not always felt lonely. 8 months before Grant put those papers on the kitchen table, Sunday mornings still belonged to us. I would make pancakes while he stood at the counter reading emails, and whenever I complained about him working before breakfast, he would put his phone face down and promise me 30 uninterrupted minutes. Back then, 30 minutes still felt like enough because I believed we were temporarily busy, not slowly becoming strangers. I worked from home illustrating children's books, so I noticed every change in our routine. Grant began leaving before 7 in the morning. Dinner moved from 7 to 8, then 9, then became a text telling me not to wait. His commercial development company had taken on 2 major projects, and Miles Carter became the colleague whose name appeared in almost every explanation. "Miles thinks the Denver proposal needs another revision." "Miles booked the client dinner." "Miles is staying late too." At first, I was grateful Grant had someone who understood the pressure. Miles was a beta, easygoing and practical, and when I met him at a company event, he was polite enough to remember that I illustrated books. There was nothing obviously threatening about him. That almost made it worse later. Our 4th anniversary arrived on a Thursday. I reserved a table at the little Italian restaurant where Grant had proposed to me, then spent an hour deciding whether wearing the same navy jacket from that night would seem romantic or ridiculous. At 6:30, Grant called. "Ethan, I am sorry. The investors moved tomorrow's presentation up." I looked at the 2 train tickets I had bought for a weekend getaway afterward. "Can Miles handle it?" Silence lasted half a second too long. "He is here with me. We both need to finish this." I canceled dinner. Grant came home after midnight carrying flowers from a 24-hour grocery store. I accepted them because I loved him, and because love can make disappointment look temporary long after it has become a pattern. A month later, I tried something simpler. Sunday breakfast. No reservations, no anniversary expectations, just pancakes and coffee. Grant entered the kitchen already dressed for work. "You are going in today?" "Only for a few hours. You said today was ours." He stopped near the door. "Miles found a problem with the numbers. It cannot wait." I remember asking, "Does anything with me ever become something that cannot wait?" Grant looked genuinely confused. "That is not fair." Maybe it was not. Maybe I had waited too long to say it. He kissed my forehead and promised we would have dinner together. We did not. Months later, after the divorce papers appeared, I finally understood what Miles had offered Grant that I could not. Miles never asked Grant whether he was happy. He never asked why work mattered more than coming home. He never needed Grant to admit that our marriage was starving quietly beneath a life that looked successful from the outside. With Miles, Grant could stay exactly as he was and call that peace. With me, he had to look at what we were losing. The morning after Grant asked for the divorce, I woke alone in our bedroom and scheduled my medical appointment. Before ending the call, the receptionist asked whether my husband would be coming with me. I stared at the empty space beside me and answered, "No. I will be coming alone." The doctor confirmed the pregnancy 3 days after Grant asked me to end our marriage. I sat alone in a quiet examination room on the north side of Chicago while she explained that everything looked normal for the early stage and scheduled another appointment several weeks later. I listened carefully, asked practical questions, and kept my voice steady until she handed me a small folder containing the information I would need. Outside, I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes without starting the engine. My first instinct was still to call Grant. For 4 years, every piece of important news had belonged to both of us. Then I remembered the white envelope on our kitchen table and drove home without touching my phone. Grant had moved into a furnished apartment near his office while the divorce proceeded. He said giving me space was the respectful thing to do. Maybe it was. The townhouse felt painfully large without him, but at least I no longer listened for a key in the front door every evening. Our attorneys handled most of the conversations after that. Grant offered me the townhouse, additional savings, and more financial support than our agreement required. I refused everything beyond a fair division of what we had built together. When he called after learning about my decision, his frustration was immediate. "Ethan, you do not have to prove anything by making this harder on yourself." I stood beside my drawing desk, looking at the unopened prenatal vitamins I had purchased that morning. "I am not proving anything." "Then let me make sure you are comfortable. I can take care of myself." He went quiet. "I know you can." I almost told him then. The words rose all the way to my throat. Instead, I asked, "Are you happy with your decision?" Another silence. "I think this is the right thing." That was enough. "Then let us finish it." Over the following weeks, I packed my belongings one room at a time. My illustrations came down first, leaving pale rectangles on the walls where framed prints had hung. I boxed my books, clothes, drawing supplies, and the ceramic coffee mug Grant had bought me during our honeymoon. I left that mug behind. Rachel Monroe, my closest friend, helped me find a 2-bedroom apartment in Evanston, less than 15 miles north but far enough to feel like another life. The second bedroom was supposed to become my studio. I already knew it would become something else. The divorce became final on a gray Monday morning. Grant and I stood outside the courthouse afterward with nothing left to sign. He looked tired but composed. "If you ever need anything," he said, "you can call me." My hand rested briefly against the folder inside my coat, the one containing another appointment card and the first ultrasound image. "I know." Grant searched my face as though waiting for something more. I gave him nothing. He had chosen a future without me before knowing about the child, and I needed to know that my baby would never become leverage against that choice. That afternoon, I drove to Evanston and unlocked my new apartment. Rachel had left a small houseplant on the kitchen counter, and a note telling me new beginnings needed something alive in them. I carried my medical folder into the empty second bedroom and placed the ultrasound image on the windowsill. "This is not how I planned our family," I whispered, looking at the tiny shape in the photograph. "But you are wanted." For the first time since the divorce papers appeared, I believed those words applied to me too. By the time I had lived in Evanston for 6 weeks, the second bedroom no longer looked like a temporary studio. My drawing tablet still occupied one corner, but beside it stood a white crib Rachel had helped me assemble on a Saturday afternoon. Children's book sketches covered my desk, prenatal vitamins sat beside the kitchen sink, and the ultrasound photograph had moved from the windowsill into a simple wooden frame. My pregnancy was beginning to show beneath my sweaters, enough that strangers sometimes glanced down before smiling at me. I expected those moments to make me feel abandoned. Instead, they reminded me that my life was moving forward. Work helped. I finished illustrations for a picture book about a boy planting his first garden, and my publisher offered me another project before I delivered the final pages. For the first time in years, I arranged my schedule around my own priorities rather than Grant's calendar. Rachel came over every Wednesday with dinner, although she usually brought enough food for 3 days. "You know you are allowed to enjoy this," she told me one evening while folding tiny baby blankets. "Enjoy what?" "Your life. Not the divorce. Not what happened. Just what comes after." I was still learning how. 20 miles south, Grant was apparently learning something different. I knew almost nothing about his relationship with Miles because I never asked. Rachel heard occasional details through mutual friends, but she stopped sharing them when she realized I genuinely did not want updates. What I did not know was that the life Grant had chosen was already beginning to feel different from the one he imagined. Miles understood late meetings, client dinners, and last-minute schedule changes because he lived inside the same professional world. At first, Grant mistook that lack of friction for compatibility. There were no arguments about missed breakfasts because Miles never expected breakfast. There were no questions about when Grant would come home because they maintained separate apartments. Everything was easy, and eventually easy became strangely empty. Grant noticed it in ordinary moments. Miles ordered black coffee, while Grant still reached automatically for the oat milk I used to keep in his refrigerator. On Sundays, he woke before sunrise expecting the smell of pancakes before remembering there was nobody downstairs making them. When he returned to our former townhouse to prepare it for sale, the rooms looked larger without my illustrations on the walls. He walked through a home he had once claimed he was too busy to enjoy and discovered that silence was not the same thing as peace. I did not know any of this yet. My attention belonged to the small life growing inside me. At my next appointment, the doctor told me everything continued to look healthy. I drove home through light snow, stopped at a bookstore, and bought the first children's book for the nursery. That night, I sat on the floor beside the crib and read it aloud, feeling ridiculous until a quiet happiness replaced the embarrassment. Meanwhile, miles away, Grant opened a kitchen cabinet in the townhouse and found the ceramic honeymoon mug I had deliberately left behind. He held it for a long time before setting it on the counter. Then he noticed something underneath a stack of old mail, a thin sketchbook with my name written across the cover. He almost placed it into the box marked for me. Instead, the book slipped open. On the first visible page was a drawing he had never seen before, dated 3 days before he asked for the divorce. It was a careful pencil sketch of a nursery. Grant stared at the nursery sketch long enough for the empty townhouse to become completely silent around him. The drawing was unmistakably mine, down to the measurements written beside the window, and the small stars I had imagined painting above a crib. What unsettled him most was the date. 3 days before he asked for the divorce. He turned the page and found several ordinary sketches, then a handwritten list of things I had apparently planned to research: crib safety, prenatal appointments, insurance coverage, and pediatricians. Grant sat down at the kitchen table. Suddenly, memories he had dismissed as insignificant returned with uncomfortable clarity. I had stopped drinking coffee weeks before our marriage ended. I had complained that certain foods smelled unusually strong. Twice I had gone to bed before 9 because I was exhausted. On the morning before the divorce, I had mentioned needing to schedule a medical appointment. Grant had barely looked away from his phone. None of it proved anything, but together the details formed a possibility he could not ignore. He called me that evening. I watched his name appear on my phone while sitting at my desk in Evanston, finishing an illustration. I let the call go unanswered. He did not call again. Instead, a message arrived. I found your sketchbook at the townhouse. I can mail it or leave it with Rachel. I stared at the screen. He did not mention the nursery drawing. That frightened me more than a direct question would have. I replied with Rachel's name and returned to work. 2 days later, Grant delivered the sketchbook to her office without asking for my address. Rachel brought it over that night. "He looked terrible," she said. "That is not my responsibility anymore." She studied me carefully. "I know." I placed the sketchbook inside a drawer. The following Saturday, I went to an independent bookstore near downtown Evanston to pick up reference books for my next illustration project. My coat no longer concealed the pregnancy unless I buttoned it completely, and the store was warm, so I left it open. I was comparing 2 picture books when I heard someone say my name. "Ethan?" My entire body went still. Grant stood about 15 feet away near the front counter. He was holding a paper shopping bag and staring at me as though the room had shifted beneath him. His eyes moved from my face to my stomach, then back again. I could see the calculation happening before he spoke. 4 years of marriage. The final weeks together. The nursery sketch dated before the divorce. Every unexplained appointment. Every moment I had almost told him. "Ethan," he said again, quieter this time. I closed the book in my hands. Grant took 1 step forward, then stopped himself. His face had lost all color. "How far along are you?" I could have lied. I could have walked away. Instead, I answered because the truth belonged to our child even if our marriage was over. "Almost 5 months." Grant looked toward the floor for a second, doing the math he already understood. When his eyes met mine again, there was no confusion left, only disbelief and the beginning of something that looked painfully like regret. His voice barely carried across the space between us. "Is the baby mine?" "The timing already answered that for you," I said. Grant stood frozen near the bookstore counter while people moved quietly through the aisles around us. His eyes dropped toward my stomach again, and this time I did not pull my coat closed. "So the baby is mine?" "Yes." The words seemed to take something out of him. He lowered his voice. "Why did you not tell me?" I looked toward the nearby windows, where light snow had begun drifting over the sidewalk. "I was going to tell you that night." Grant understood immediately. "When I gave you the divorce papers. 10 minutes earlier, I was standing in our kitchen trying to figure out how to tell my husband we were having a child. Then you told me you wanted a future with someone else. Ethan, if I had known. That is exactly why I did not tell you." His expression tightened. "I do not understand. I wanted you to stay for me, Grant, not because I could give you a child." He stared at me. "You should have given me the choice. You made your choice before you knew. But this changes everything. It changes the fact that you are going to be a father. It does not erase the fact that you chose to stop being my husband." Grant looked as though he wanted to argue, but no answer came. We moved to a quiet seating area near the back of the bookstore, where I could sit without turning our conversation into a public scene. Grant remained across from me, keeping several feet between us. "Are you healthy?" he asked. "Yes." "Is the baby healthy?" "Everything has been normal so far." His shoulders lowered slightly. "Do you know what we are having?" "Not yet." He swallowed. "When is your next appointment?" I hesitated. "Thursday." "Can I come?" The request came so quickly that I almost laughed from disbelief. "No." Grant blinked. "Ethan, you learned about the pregnancy 5 minutes ago. I need time before you become part of my medical appointments." He nodded slowly. "All right." That answer surprised me more than resistance would have. "I am not keeping our child from you," I continued. "I will share important information, and when I am comfortable, we can discuss appointments and what being involved will look like. I want to be involved. Then be patient." Grant rubbed one hand across his face. For the first time since I had known him, he looked completely uncertain about what came next. "Does Miles know? Why would Miles know about my pregnancy?" "He would not." Grant looked ashamed of the question. "I am sorry." I stood and buttoned my coat. "Grant, this baby is not a doorway back into my life. If you want to become a good father, I will not stand in your way. But do not confuse fatherhood with getting our marriage back." He rose but did not follow when I stepped away. "Ethan." I turned. His voice had lost the controlled certainty I remembered from the night of our divorce. "Were you ever going to tell me?" "Yes." "I was waiting until I knew I could tell you without secretly hoping the truth would make you come home." I left the bookstore and walked into the cold afternoon. Behind me, Grant remained inside with the future he had chosen suddenly colliding with the future he had never known existed. For the next 4 days, Grant barely slept. He arrived at his office before sunrise, stayed long after everyone else left, and discovered that work no longer provided the escape it once had. Every quiet moment returned him to the bookstore and the sentence I had left him with. "I wanted you to stay for me, not because I could give you a child." He replayed the final months of our marriage differently now. My exhaustion. The coffee I stopped drinking. The medical appointment he had barely acknowledged. The nursery sketch dated before the divorce. Most painful of all was remembering the night he placed those papers in front of me and asked why I had nothing more to say. Now he knew I had been carrying the biggest thing I had ever needed to tell him. Miles noticed the change first. On Friday evening, he found Grant sitting alone in a conference room after everyone else had gone home. "You have been somewhere else all week," Miles said. Grant did not pretend otherwise. "Ethan is pregnant." Miles went completely still. "Is it yours?" "Yes." Grant stared through the windows at Chicago glowing below them. "Almost 5 months." Miles slowly sat across from him. "Did he know before the divorce?" "He was going to tell me the same night I gave him the papers." For several seconds neither man spoke. Then Miles asked the question Grant had been avoiding. "If you had known, would you still have left?" Grant could not answer. Miles nodded as though the silence told him enough. "That is the problem." "What does that mean?" "It means you are not only upset about the baby. You are finally looking at what you walked away from." Grant lowered his eyes. "I thought you and I made sense." "We did make sense," Miles replied. "At work. At dinners. In all the places where nobody needed much from you." Grant looked up. Miles was not angry. That somehow made the truth harder to dismiss. "You did not choose me because you loved me more," Miles continued. "You chose me because I asked less of you." The words followed Grant home that night. His apartment was immaculate and silent. No drawings covered the walls. No half-finished children's books occupied the coffee table. Nobody complained that he was late because nobody was waiting. For months, Grant had called that freedom. Now it felt like evidence. He and Miles ended their relationship quietly the following week, without accusations. Miles refused to become a bridge back to me, and Grant finally understood that ending one relationship did not restore another. He did not call me. Instead, he found a therapist through his health plan and scheduled an appointment. When the therapist asked why he was there, Grant answered with unusual simplicity. I spent years treating emotional distance like stability, and I lost my family before I understood the difference. Meanwhile, I attended Thursday's appointment with Rachel beside me. Everything looked healthy. That evening, I sent Grant a brief message telling him the baby was doing well. His reply arrived 2 minutes later. Thank you for telling me. Nothing more. No demand for photographs. No request for my address. No attempt to turn medical information into reconciliation. A week later, another message appeared. I am starting therapy. I am not telling you because I expect it to change anything between us. I should have done it years ago. I read those words twice before setting my phone down. Grant was finally doing something I had once begged him to do, looking inward without requiring me to stand beside him while he did it. For the first time since the bookstore, I wondered whether losing us had not driven him mad at all. Maybe it had finally made him stop running. 3 weeks after Grant told me he had started therapy, I invited him to a prenatal appointment. His reply came almost immediately, but instead of assuming the invitation meant more than it did, he simply wrote, "Thank you. I will be there." He arrived at the clinic 15 minutes early in a navy coat and waited in the lobby until I walked in. When he saw me, his attention briefly moved to my growing stomach before returning to my face. "Hi, Ethan." "Hi." He did not reach for me. That mattered. During the appointment, Grant listened while the doctor explained that the baby was developing normally. When the heartbeat filled the room, he went completely still. His eyes became wet, but he did not turn the moment into an apology or a promise. He simply listened. Outside the clinic, he asked, "What do I have to do to become someone our child can rely on?" I studied him before answering. "Be consistent when nobody is rewarding you for it." Grant nodded. "I can do that. Do not tell me. Show me." And he did. Not dramatically. Not all at once. He attended the appointments I invited him to and accepted the ones I wanted to attend alone. He enrolled in a parenting class without asking me to join him. When I mentioned that the crib still needed a changing table beside it, he offered to help assemble one, then waited until I gave him a time. The following Saturday, he arrived at my Evanston apartment carrying a toolbox and nothing else. No flowers. No expensive gifts. No attempt to turn practical help into romance. He spent nearly 2 hours assembling the furniture because he refused to pretend the instructions made sense when they did not. I laughed when he installed one piece backward. Grant looked at the crooked shelf and laughed too. It was the first uncomplicated moment we had shared since the divorce. Later, while I made tea, he noticed one of my new illustrations framed above the desk. "Your publisher used the garden story?" "They did. It looks good." Months earlier, praise from him would have made me search for proof that he still loved me. Now I simply said, "Thank you." Grant continued therapy. He never told me what he discussed unless it directly affected something between us. One evening, after another appointment, he said, "I learned that I kept treating needs like demands. Every time you asked me to come home, I heard criticism instead of hearing that you missed me." I rested both hands around my mug. "Understanding that does not undo it." I know. He had finally stopped using understanding as a shortcut to forgiveness. As winter settled over Chicago, Grant became reliable in ways our marriage had rarely allowed him to be. He showed up when he promised. He called only when we had agreed. He respected my apartment as my home. Most importantly, he never mentioned getting remarried. One snowy Sunday afternoon, after finishing another parenting class, we stood outside beneath the clinic awning waiting for our rides. Grant looked at me and said, "I used to think providing for someone was the same as being there for them. You were very good at providing. And terrible at being there." I smiled despite myself. "You are improving." Grant smiled back, but he did not ask what that meant for us. As my car arrived, I realized the balance between us had quietly reversed. For years I had waited for Grant to come home and choose our marriage. Now he was learning to wait without demanding that I choose him. And for the first time, waiting was exactly what love required. Our son arrived on a clear March morning, 7 months after Grant had placed divorce papers between us at the kitchen table. I had asked Grant to be at the hospital, and he stayed beside me through every uncertain hour without trying to control a single decision. When the nurse finally placed our baby in my arms, Grant stood close enough to see him but waited until I looked up and said, "Come meet your son!" His expression broke into something softer than I had ever seen during our marriage. "Hello, Oliver," he whispered. We had chosen the name together weeks earlier, one careful decision among many that taught us how different cooperation felt from assumption. Grant became the father he had promised to become. He handled early morning bottles when he stayed at my apartment, learned which lullaby calmed Oliver fastest, and rearranged work meetings without announcing every sacrifice as though he deserved applause. He continued therapy. I continued illustrating. Neither of us treated Oliver as proof that our marriage should automatically return. For months passed before Grant asked me to dinner alone. Rachel watched Oliver while we went to the same Italian restaurant where Grant had proposed years earlier. I almost refused because I did not want nostalgia making decisions for me, but the evening felt surprisingly peaceful. After dessert, Grant placed a small rectangular box on the table. My chest tightened. "If that is a ring, I am leaving." Grant almost smiled. "It is not a ring." I opened the box. Inside was a stack of blank cream-colored paper and 2 black pens. I looked at him. "What is this?" Grant rested his hands on the table. "The last time our marriage ended, I put papers in front of you after I had already decided what our future would be. I never asked what you needed. I never gave us a chance to write anything together." He nodded toward the blank pages. "I am not asking you to marry me again. I am asking whether, someday, you might want to decide together what a new relationship would require." I stared at the empty first page. Months earlier, I had signed divorce papers because Grant had already written the ending without me. Now there was nothing written at all. No promises. No conditions. No assumption that forgiveness guaranteed reconciliation. I picked up one pen. "I am not ready to get married again. I know. I might not be ready for a long time. Then we take a long time." I looked at him carefully, searching for disappointment disguised as patience. I found none. So I wrote the first sentence. "Say the difficult thing before silence says it for you." Grant read it, then took the second pen. He wrote beneath mine, "Never make the person you love compete with the life you are building together." I smiled. "That one sounds expensive." Therapy was expensive. I laughed, and Grant laughed with me. When we returned to my apartment, Oliver was asleep against Rachel's shoulder. Grant took him gently while I carried the box of blank pages inside. Nothing about our future was guaranteed, and strangely, that made it feel more honest than any promise we had made before. Grant was no longer asking me to return to the marriage we lost. He was asking whether we could build something neither of us had lived before. At the kitchen table, I opened the box again and looked at all those empty pages waiting behind the first one. For once, the blank space did not frighten me. It belonged to both of us.